G'day, g'day. Story number 3, Down with His Ship by M.J. Campbell. By the end, he was sinking down into the depths of a rapidly deteriorating mind, bringing some of his crew with him. Pressure and responsibility had been thrown onto his shoulders as if it were nothing, as if he were built for it, with little consideration about the man's own well-being. He had held strong for years, but our once rosy-cheeked, heartily laughing captain was no automaton. At least Atlas had been a titan. My part-time position as a barber aboard the SS Nelly, a multi-purpose exploration vessel, meant that I saw in close detail his gradual but complete disintegration. However, even from afar, if he paid the attention others didn't, the signs were still present. His hair had turned salt and pepper at 40. His face was scarred, weathered, and leathery by 50. Only now, in his 50s and already an old man, did his appearance change very little. During his speeches on the main deck, you'd perhaps only be able to notice that his eyelids had drooped ever so slightly, that his posture was less rigid than in his youth. He let himself slouch forward in his last months, yielding to the ship's artificial gravity he had always loathed. "I'm telling you, Yuri, it's not like on Earth. Earth is a perfect 9.8 newtons. The sand reaches up and climbs between your toes as you shift your feet about. Once, at a dinner party hosted by, I think it was some politician, they showed off a private garden, and I actually stood in grass. Can you believe that, Yuri?" "Yes, sir." He always made sure to say names regularly, seemingly acknowledging that they were more than just crew to him. "Real grass, not that synthetic stuff. Anyway, in front of all these suits and tuxedos, I took off my shoes and felt it with my bare feet. I was a much bigger and scarier man back then. No one dared say anything. They shot barrages of odd looks, but still I stood there, bouncing up and down, and the grass seemed to spring up against me." "That sounds incredible, sir." "Oh, it was, Yuri. That's my point. Gravity on Earth is perfect. 9.8 newtons doesn't crush you the way it does here." He leaned his head back in the chair, examining the high alloy ceiling with all its mathematical straight edges, while I brushed snipped hair off his shoulders. "Admittedly, around the colonies it varies, but not a noticeable amount. Here, in this tin can, I'm finally starting to feel slightly suffocated." What I saw, up close trimming his beard and snipping at his thinning hair, was not his slouch or his wrinkles, but his fingernails. Chewed and ripped right down to the nub, they were like an anxious schoolboy's. My main role aboard the SS Nelly was as a chef, a butcher, in fact. It was standard for all the crew with roles that weren't specialist or full-time to learn a second. For some reason, my skills with a knife were easily translated by some bureaucrat into scissors, so I also cut hair. My daily routine consisted of waking early and prepping the meals for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. I set 2 hours of stripping meat from bone, finally about lunchtime without eating myself. Not a complaint. This is what the captain did and had asked me to join him in. "Obviously it's your choice, Yuri, but I feel that sometimes I'm facing my duties, my life, everything, alone. Maybe it would make us both feel slightly better. We could eat lunch together sometimes. Maybe not then. Just ignore me." After we had eaten together, I used my exercise allowance to stroll around. The Nelly had 3 decks open to all. Uniform, gunmetal grey corridors connected everywhere in the ship, which created the effect of a certain artificiality about the communal rooms, an uncanny feeling of unrealness. Even after decades on the ship, I felt like I was being studied in a laboratory under the crisp white light of the cafeteria. I felt as if the old book smell in the library probably came from a spray. I felt as if the cinema would blast us all into deep space if we complained to each other during the picture, a dormant airlock. At least the corridors seemed honest. Grey, brutal, and bleak, but honest. The same materials and minimalism as the bridge where real life and real decisions were made, so generally I stuck to corridors, smiling and making small talk with passers-by. Around the time of the events I'm about to tell you, we had been away on a voyage for about 5 months, so as one of the barbers I had got to know almost everyone. Someone would turn a corner and recognize the old barber who seemed to have been aboard forever, with his great grey mop of hair and beaming smile and useless announcements of "Happy 5 months" or "Beef stew tonight," and I would hobble all the way down to the barber shop on the lower deck. One of the great privileges of cutting hair, also one of the curses, is how much you know. I could fill volumes if I were to write down all of the conversations I've had with people. All of them sat staring deeply into their own souls in front of me. Every joy, every pain on the Nelly was told to me by someone in some way or another, in words, in shifting gazes and silences. There were often periods in my career where I found I could not fall asleep at night, my brain buzzing and beeping like the switchboards and displays on the bridge. The captain had his hair cut every Saturday when he allowed himself the afternoon off. He poured himself some scotch, put on a record that echoed around his plain metallic quarters, and invited me in as an old friend. When he sat in his chair and stared ahead of himself, he was the same as any of the others whose hair I cut. He spoke and listened and laughed and unravelled. Towards the end, the captain missed his hair appointments, and there was a distress in how he spoke to me, how he didn't speak to me, how he passed me in the halls. He twitched and shifted his eyes around the room as if looking for a weapon or an escape. We had stopped eating lunch altogether. Oh, we had stopped eating lunch together. Sorry. "Yuri, I have matters to attend to." The time was 7 a.m., the start of the morning, but the lights only flickered weakly in the hallways instead of projecting daylight. This had not happened before. After a lot of questions and some quiet panic, someone was able to fix the lights, and the inside of the ship shone brightly once again, starting the day only slightly later than usual. It was enough to cause everyone unease. Once again, the captain cancelled the haircut. "Emergency meeting, hall on main deck, 1 p.m, attendance required," blasted over the sound system repeatedly for about a minute. Instead of talking to me, my younger crewmates paced, their nods tighter and distracted. Some of the children I passed on my way to the kitchen had tears streaking down their cheeks and were holding their hands tight over their ears, whimpering. It was lamb for dinner, and I tore meat off the bones with more force than usual. The announcement sounded from the ship's speakers twice more. By 12:45, almost everyone had gathered in the hall. Crew temporarily assigned to security separated all personnel into their work units and stood them around the hall. The captain stood behind a lectern on the stage, hunched, grey, pale, rechecking his notes. "Emergency meeting, hall on main deck, 1 p.m, attendance required," blared one more time. Then silence. The captain began to speak into a microphone in hushed tones. "Welcome, crew, passengers. I'm sorry to disrupt your day. Unfortunately, events have occurred. I feel I can no longer keep any information from you." He said maintenance had not been performed on the lights this morning. 3 engineers had failed to check into their stations. They were found dead in their quarters. Bottles of pills were empty, dropped by limp, hanging hands. They had each taken their own lives. I had trimmed 2 of their beards earlier this week. They had been talkative. I tried to remember whether they had smiled. Gasps and weeping and the confused wails of children could be heard all around. The captain was finished, silent, staring ahead straight into nothingness. He blinked and seemed to snap awake as the volume in the gradually hall rose. Bit of a typo there, I think. He blinked and seemed to snap awake as the volume in the hall gradually rose. He tried to calm everyone by raising his voice. "Please, everyone, remain calm. You are strong and brave people. I trust each and every one of you. I felt you should know. What we must not do is panic." He succeeded. He drew all attention to him. They saw their leader and waited for his words, his plans. As the captain looked around, his arms raised powerfully like a modern Moses, seeing the shimmers of their hope, his expression and his facade cracked and faltered. He remembered what he had to say next. "There is further serious news. I thought it best not to reveal anything until a solution was found, but I have no other options. For the past months, we have been drifting." General loudness and crying scattered around after this, confusion and anger and nerves colliding in harsh sentences that people kept repeating. I tried to pay attention to what he said over the din, but even I was shocked to a fearful part deafness. Drifting. Catastrophic power failure. Fixing it. Drifting. A slight dip in the noise, and we all hear a question asked by a young woman who I know to be Lucia, a children's nurse with a sweet smile and dreams of opening a school in the next colony we stop by. "Why haven't the engineers been working on it, trying to come up with a plan or fixing it?" The captain freezes, and the divine aspect he wore dissolves completely. Everyone stays hushed around him, waiting. He suddenly looks like an old man, looking down at the mercy of gravity. 3 of them had been. Then there came an eruption, and the guards tried guiding everyone back to their spots, but the crowd started to surge and overwhelm them. People were screaming and crying really loudly. Disbelieving laughter was sometimes scattered in the midst of the screams, but all I noticed as people pushed and shoved against me are how grey and metallic the walls are. Gunmetal grey. Later, at a more private emergency meeting with only head engineers and navigators sat around a large table on the bridge, the same argument they had been having for 2 months raged again. The ship had to be evacuated. Launching escape shuttles would take up a large supply of the ship's depleting power. Alternatively, some could be jettisoned with minimal power to try and save the main ship. There were not enough supplies in the shuttles to make it back the distance they had been drifting. Filling up the shuttles with more supplies meant less space for people. 20 could normally fit aboard one ship. With less room, many would have to be left behind, so any at all could survive. The captain didn't notice how, but together they all grimly agreed on 50. 50 would go aboard 10 of the 10... 50 would go aboard 5 of the 10 escape shuttles, piled high with supplies and possibly far-reaching communication equipment. The others could be safely jettisoned to preserve power. Slumped in his chair, translucent and white like a spectre, the captain muttered about deep space. Drifting. How unlikely survival was. The argument raged on, words echoing around him. Doom. Sacrifice. Impossible. Choice. Choose. Choose. Captain, how will we choose who goes? They were all looking at him, stony expressions like gargoyles. He sat at the head of the table, convinced the artificial gravity was cracking his bones so slightly that no one could notice apart from him. The captain only told me about this meeting after the shuttle launches, how he closed with, "I know what needs to be done. I know who will go." All my fathers have done this job, Captain. I knew that I wanted to do this, but sometimes I do doubt it, whether I had any choice. I mean, who would do this? All of them, apparently. All the way down from my great-great-grandfather. Of course, he had a boat, a beautiful boat, on crystal-clear Mediterranean waters, not this piece of shit drifting through nothingness. He had rescheduled his appointment with me. A final haircut before we left, he said. "We've been drifting for months, Yuri," he said with tears dripping down and mixing with the shaving foam I had spread across his face. "They've come up with nothing. They can't fix it. We needed to fix it." He had his eyes closed and was shivering slightly. He looked so weak and helpless in that moment, I had to push away the morbid thought he would ask me to put him out of his misery with the razor I was using. "Fuck this gravity, Yuri. I can't fucking breathe in here. We need to get out." I stood sort of stunned for a second. I'd never really heard him curse before. Later, the entire crew of the Nellie gathered on the loading deck where the 10 grey, coffin-shaped escape shuttles were being prepared for launch. I climbed aboard Shuttle 6 with the captain. He told me we had been organised and split up according to fitness, experience, ingenuity, and many other factors. My first thoughts about our shuttle crew were, wow, well, they sure do all look experienced. Myself, the captain, and about 18 others had been cramped aboard. No one looked under the age of 50. We smiled and shouted our goodbyes and promised to find help as the hatch whooshed and sealed behind us. The only responses to us were loud sobs and cries from our friends. Suddenly I felt very ill and very wrong. Captain, I'm not sure if it's my place to say it, but isn't there a saying about a captain going down with his ship? I'd much rather that some of those young people be here instead of me. He turned to me with tears streaming down his cheeks. We heard a final announcement over loudspeakers. Jettison of shuttles 6 through 10 imminent. As he placed a hand on my shoulder, there was a loud metallic crash outside that signaled our detachment from the ship. The inside of the shuttle quickly became very cold, and the light from the main ship spinning through a small window began to darken. Yuri, my friend, I'm doing one better. Lovely. There we go. That was Down with His Ship by M.J. Candle. I have just one more story. We'll see you for that one.